This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Robert Scott. Miscellaneous Essays by Thomas De Quincey. Section 15, Dinner, Real and Reputed, Part 2. These are the anchors by which man rides into that billowy ocean between morning and night. The first anchor, viz., breakfast, having given way in Rome, the more needed there is that he should pull up by the second, and this is often reputed to be dinner. As your dictionary, good reader, translated breakfast by that vain word jentaculum, so doubtless it will translate dinner by that still vainer word prandium. Sincerely we hope that your own dinner on this day and through all time coming may have a better root in fact and substance than this most visionary of all baseless things, the Roman prandium, of which we shall presently show that the most approved translation is moonshine. Reader, we are not jesting here. In the very spirit of serious truth, we assure you that the delusion about jentaculum is even extended by this other delusion about prandium. Salmasius himself, for whom a natural prejudice of place and time partially obscured the truth, admits, however, that prandium was a meal which the ancients rarely took. His very words are, raro prandabat veteres. Now judge for yourself of the good sense which is shown in translating the word dinner, which must of necessity mean the chief meal, a Roman word which represents a fancy meal, a meal of caprice, a meal which few people took. At this moment, what is the single point of agreement between the noon meal of the English laborer and the evening meal of the English gentleman? What is the single circumstance common to both, which causes us to denominate them by the common name of dinner? It is that in both we recognize the principal meal of the day, the meal upon which is thrown the onus of the day's support. In everything else they are as wide asunder as the poles, but they agree in this one point of their function. Is it credible that to represent such a meal amongst ourselves, we select a Roman word so notoriously expressing a mere shadow, a pure apology, that very few people ever tasted it? Nobody sate down to it, not many washed their hands after it, and gradually the very name of it became interchangeable with one another, implying the slightest possible act of trying or sipping. Post laurationem sine mensa prandium, says Seneca. Post quod non saut lavande manus. This is, after bathing I take a prandium without sitting down to the table, and such a prandium as being after itself no need of washing the hands. No moonshine as little soils the hands as it oppresses the stomach. Reader, we as well as Pliny have an uncle, an East Indian uncle. Doubtless you have such an uncle. Everybody has an Indian uncle. Generally such a person is rather yellow, rather yellow. Note, to quote Canning versus Lord Dunham, that is the chief fault with his physics, but as to his morals, he is universally a man of princely aspirations and habits. He is not so orientally rich as he is reputed, but he is always orientally munificent. Call upon him at any hour from 2 to 5, he insists on your taking tiffin, and such a tiffin. The English corresponding term is luncheon, but how meagre a shadow is the European meal to its glowing Asiatic cousin. Still gloriously as tiffin shines, does anybody imagine that it is a vicarious dinner, or even meant to be the substitute of dinner? Wait till 8, and you will have your eyes opened on that subject. So of the Roman prandium, had it been as luxurious as it was simple, still it was always viewed as something meant only to stay the stomach, as a prologue to something beyond. The prandium was far enough from giving the feeblest idea of the English luncheon, yet it stood in the same relation to the Roman day. Now, to Englishmen, the meal scarcely exists, and were it not for women, whose delicacy of organization does not allow them to fast so long as men, would probably be abolished. It is singular in this, as in other points, how nearly England and ancient Rome approximate. We all know how hard it is to tempt a man generally into spoiling his appetite by eating before dinner. The same dislike of violating what they called the integrity of the appetite (integrum famem) existed at Rome. Every man who knows anything of Latin critically sees the connection of the word integer with in and tedigai. Integer means what is intact, unviolated by touch. Cicero, when protesting against spoiling his appetite for dinner by tasting anything beforehand, says, integrum famem ad coenam afferam. I shall bring to dinner an appetite untampered with. Nay, so much stress did the Romans lay on maintaining this primitive state of appetite undisturbed, that any prelusions with either jentaculum or prandium were said by a very strong phrase indeed, pullere femem, to pollute the sanctity of the appetite. The appetite was regarded as a holy vestal flame, soaring upwards towards dinner throughout the day. If undebauched, it tended to its natural consummation in coena, expired like a phoenix to rise again out of its own ashes. On this theory, to which language had accommodated itself, the two preclusive meals of 9 o'clock a.m. and of 1 p.m., so far from being ratified by the public sense and adopted into the economy of the day, were regarded gloomily as gross irregularities, enormities, debauchers of the natural instinct, and, in so far as they thwarted that instinct, lessened it, or depraved it, were universally held to be full of pollution, and finally to profane a motion of nature. Such was the language. But we guess what is passing in the reader's mind. He thinks that all this proves the prandium to have been a meal of little account, and in very many cases absolutely unknown. But still he thinks all this might happen to the English dinner, that might be neglected. Supper might be generally preferred, and nevertheless dinner would be as truly entitled to the name of dinner as before. Many a student neglects his dinner. Enthusiasm in any pursuit must often have extinguished appetite for all of us. Many a time and oft did this happen to Sir Isaac Newton. Evidence is on record that such a deponent at 8 o'clock a.m. found Sir Isaac with one stocking on, one off. At 2, said deponent called him to dinner. Being interrogated whether Sir Isaac had pulled on the minus stocking or gartered the plus stocking, witness replied that he had not. Being asked if Sir Isaac came to dinner, replied that he did not. Being again asked,